So, Hurricane Dorian, of course, is a big issue right now in the United States. The last thing I've seen in news is that it's moving towards the coast, the east coast of Florida. And yeah, it's one of the strongest hurricanes actually in recorded history, which goes, the satellite era goes back into the 1970s, so it's not a super long record, but that's 185 miles per hour of maximum sustained wind speeds. And it might actually spare the eastern coast of the worst because it might not make full landfall. It will probably, that's the last forecast I've seen, make a northward slope along the eastern coast of the United States. So hopefully not too many people get involved in that, and nobody gets killed. In addition to, I think there are a couple of victims on the Bahamas already. And to put this in perspective, the hurricane season this year has had a slow start. And now this one huge hurricane is actually making it an average, maybe above average hurricane season. So obviously this one storm has gotten attention of politicians and so-called climate experts who have been saying, yeah, this is a dire warning about the future of climate if we continue to warm the planet by greenhouse gas emissions. And one particular tweet by presidential contender Bernie Sanders on Twitter, retweeting Bill McKibben of all people on the subject, was the following. When we talk about climate crisis, this is what we mean. Our people are in danger and it's only going to get worse. We have no choice but to pass a Green New Deal. So his implication is, yeah, of course, this hurricane wouldn't have happened without human global warming, and it will get worse in the future, and we need his policies to prevent that in the future. So, but what actually happened to the long-term trend in hurricanes? That's the real question, because we don't want to confuse, like Bernie Sanders does, climate and weather, and this is a weather event. So there hasn't been much of a trend over the satellite record, which, as I mentioned, goes back to the 1970s. So no discernible upward trend in frequency or intensity. The global accumulated cyclone energy, which is a measure of the total energy that storms in 1 year generate, also shows no discernible trends. There's a lot of volatility year on year, and over decades there seems to be a cyclical component in the natural climate systems for this kind of tropical cyclone, or the stronger version is then a hurricane in this. And one primary reason is that the climate didn't change that much so far, and that the ocean sea surface temperature, which is often referenced as a primary impact, isn't the only impacting factor. There are very strong factors. So the prevailing theory, for example, is that in a warming world where the ocean water warms and then provides more energy to this kind of storm, also creates fewer storms because the polar regions are actually warming faster than the tropics. And that means cold and warm air masses have a lower differential in temperature, and that creates fewer of these storms. So the prevailing theory is that in the future we might see slightly stronger storms of this type, but fewer of them. So whether that or not will create more damage to humans is anybody's guess. It's very difficult to predict. But yeah, so it's not clear that there's any increase in this type of storm, it's definitely speculative whether there will be more damage to humans from landfalling hurricanes in a warming future. And as Roy Spencer points out on his blog, there's some proxy evidence that something like 1,000 to 4,000 years ago, storms like this were more frequent actually from sediment records, which is not the same as a precise satellite record, of course, but this gives us some indication about what the climate trends in storms are. And this is one of the things where even the IPCC says, okay, we don't see much of a trend in here. So, of course, the politicians try to abuse it. They tried that with tornadoes and other things. But I want to go to a different type of comment that I've seen in the past. So there are some climate scientists and other experts that have claimed that, oh yeah, we can analyze this storm retroactively and say, oh yeah, the storm surge was bigger because of rising sea levels, and this or that storm or pattern or pathway was worse because of global warming. And I find this quite nonsensical because, as I said, the warming world, the prevailing theory is that we would see fewer storms but slightly stronger storms. So maybe in this warming since the 1950s, we are missing out 3 storms, right, this season that we would otherwise would have seen. So maybe we have less damage this season because of global warming so far. I mean, it didn't change that much, but maybe that's true. We can't really tell because we have no planet B with the exact same conditions, only with no CO2 emissions from humans, obviously. So it's a nonsensical argument to sort of pseudo-analyze retroactively this particular storm. Maybe it would have taken a different pathway in a world without the human component of CO2, right? We don't really know that. So whether that's more or less damage, we can't tell, and it's really disingenuous to make this kind of expert analysis of this kind of storm. But one positive note I have for the audience is a tweet from Ryan Murray, who's a meteorologist and hurricane expert or a storm expert. And he had the following to say. The weather models have improved so much in the last 20 years. Like Floyd back in 1999, if we had the same weather models today for Dorian, then there's no way we would have any confidence in the eventual northward turn. Instead, 5 million may be evacuated. So that's a very important point, because what he's saying is, oh, look, if our weather models that predict the pathway of these kinds of storms would be the same as 20 years ago, we would cause a false alarm and evacuate 5 million people right now, which we wouldn't have to evacuate. So this is like false alarms or uncertainty can create this kind of damage, right? And that's a really good thing, and it's really good that this forecasting system is improving. And this is an example of the power of technology, because whatever the future nature of storms, whether there will be more or fewer storms, stronger or weaker storms, it doesn't really matter that much, as will our technology to deal with that, to master the climate, to predict storm pathways and predict it in great detail, because both the actual storm impact can cause damage if it's a surprise to you, but you can also be too cautious and falsely predict damage that doesn't actually occur, and then you will have defensive measures that are very costly, but they don't do anything. So we can prevent a lot of damage to humans in the future, and particularly economic damage, which ultimately also means life or death, if we improve our technology. And for that, we need, of course, a lot of energy and freedom, and certainly not Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal.
Yeah, I want to go back to that tweet of his. So that it was, our people are in danger and it's only going to get worse. We have no choice but to pass a Green New Deal. And of course, anytime somebody wants to increase power or rob people of their freedom, it's some view that, hey, disaster is going to befall unless you do what I say. And like, my attitude is exactly the opposite, which is like, to the extent that we're worried about storms, and we always have been, we need as much freedom, capitalism, wealth, and energy as possible to make ourselves as safe as possible. And that what a Green New Deal would do is it would make us completely vulnerable, because we would have no wealth or energy precisely because we robbed ourselves of freedom. I mean, at the end of the day, no storm and no series of storms has killed as many people as socialism.